A whisper can be louder than a shout. For Kendall Mayo, her husband's whisper was a cage, its bars forged from words like unsuitable, simple, and not right for the occasion. He was Tavian Grimsby, a titan of industry, whose world was built on polished surfaces and ruthless ambition, and she was his forgotten masterpiece, hidden away in the attic. He believed she belonged in the shadows, a quiet keeper of his home while he conquered the world. But what happens when the cage door is left open, leading not to an escape, but to the very stage where her captor stands? The penthouse air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken disappointment. It clung to the velvet drapes and settled on the cold marble floors of the sprawling apartment that overlooked the city's glittering heart. From the bedroom, Kendall Mayo could hear the telltale sounds of her husband, Tavian Grimsby, preparing for his evening. The sharp click of a watch clasp, the soft thud of a shoe brush against Italian leather, the rustle of a bespoke suit being lifted from its silk covering. Each sound was a tick of the clock, counting down to another evening she would spend alone. She stood before the full-length antique mirror in her dressing room, a space Tavian had designed but she rarely used. She ran a hand over the simple navy blue dress. She wore a comfortable garment that felt like a second skin. It was elegant in its own way, but in Tavian's world, elegance was measured in carats and designer labels, not quiet dignity. Tavian strode into the room, a vision of tailored perfection. His dark hair was meticulously styled. His jaw was set with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, and his steel-grey eyes swept over her with a familiar dismissive glance. "You're still wearing that?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. He wasn't really asking a question. He was passing a verdict. Kendall's hands fell to her sides. "I was hoping. Maybe I could come with you tonight, Tavian. It's the Starlight Charity Gala. We haven't been out together in months." Her voice was soft, a hopeful melody in the sterile silence of their home. Tavian sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured tolerance. He walked over to his valet stand, adjusting the knot of his silver tie in the mirror, his reflection giving her more attention than he did. "Kendall, we've been over this. The gala is a crucial event for the new waterfront development. I'll be networking with the Beaumonts, the Vanderbilts. Everyone who matters will be there." "I matter," she whispered, the words barely audible. He finally turned to face her, his expression a mask of strained patience. "Of course you do, darling. You matter here in our home. But out there, it's a different world. It's a performance. You have to know the players, the script. You're too genuine for that." It was the cruelest kind of insult, wrapped in the guise of a compliment. He called her genuine, but what he meant was unpolished, unsophisticated, unfit for public display. He made her virtues sound like liabilities. "I can learn," she insisted, a flicker of defiance in her gentle brown eyes. "I read about the Beaumont Foundation's new initiative. I could talk to Mrs. Beaumont about her work in art restoration. We share that interest." Tavian let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive. Genevieve Beaumont doesn't want to discuss dusty canvases with the wife of a potential business partner. She wants to see power influence. She wants to be charmed." He gestured vaguely at her simple dress. "And frankly, Kendall, you don't look the part. You would be a distraction." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. A distraction. That's what she was to him. Not a partner, not a wife, but a potential complication to his carefully curated image. The hope in her chest shriveled and died, replaced by a familiar cold ache. She had met Tavian in a university library. He had been captivated, he'd said, by her quiet intelligence and her passion for history. She was an art history scholar with a promising future. But after they married, He had systematically dismantled that future. Her academic pursuits were deemed hobbies. Her friends were unambitious. Her world, once vibrant with intellectual curiosity, had shrunk to the size of their penthouse. He had convinced her it was for the best that his world was enough for both of them. Now she saw the truth. He hadn't wanted a partner. He'd wanted an ornament, and when she'd failed to glitter in the way he demanded, he had simply put her away on a shelf. "I see," she said, her voice flat. She retreated into herself, pulling a cloak of calm resignation around her shoulders. It was a defense mechanism she had perfected over years of marriage. Seeing her surrender, Tavian's demeanor softened, becoming patronizingly gentle. "Hey," he said, walking over and tipping her chin up with a finger. "It's for the best. You hate these stuffy events anyway. Why don't you order in from that little Italian place you like? Get some rest. I'll be late." He kissed her on the forehead, a sterile, dismissive gesture that felt more like a brand than a sign of affection. Then he turned and walked away, his confident footsteps echoing on the marble. Kendall stood motionless, listening as he left the apartment. The heavy front door clicked shut, followed by the soft whir of the private elevator descending. And then silence. A profound, deafening silence that filled every corner of their magnificent, empty home. She looked at her reflection again. A woman trapped in a gilded cage, whose wings had been clipped so methodically, she'd almost forgotten she was meant to fly. Tonight, Tavian had made it clear he would soar, and she would remain grounded. But even the quietest soul has a breaking point, and in the suffocating silence of the penthouse, a tiny forgotten spark of rebellion began to glow. The silence that Tavian left behind was a physical presence. It pressed in on Kendall, amplifying the ticking of the grand clock in the foyer and the distant, mournful siren wailing across the city. For a long while, she didn't move from her spot in the dressing room. His words, a distraction, echoed in her mind, each repetition chipping away at the fragile remnants of her self-worth. She had loved him once fiercely and completely. She had believed in the future he'd painted for them, a partnership of equals. But the man who had just walked out the door was a stranger, a sculptor who had tried to chisel her into an image of his own making, and upon finding the stone of her character, too resilient, had simply abandoned the project. Drifting aimlessly through the cavernous apartment, she eventually found herself in the one room that was truly hers, the library. It was less a library and more a workshop. Canvases in various states of restoration leaned against walls lined with books on art conservation and chemical analysis. A large table in the center was covered with brushes, solvents, and magnifying lamps. This was her sanctuary, the last bastion of the woman she used to be. Her gaze fell upon a particular painting, resting on an easel in the corner, illuminated by a single soft light. It was a 17th-century landscape by a lesser-known artist, a piece she'd acquired at a small estate auction. The canvas was cracked and obscured by centuries of grime, its vibrant soul hidden beneath a veil of neglect. She felt a kinship with it. Running her fingers gently over the darkened surface, she felt a familiar pull, a desire to heal, to reveal the beauty hidden beneath the damage. This was where she found her voice, not in words, but in the patient, meticulous work of her hands. It was a language Tavian had never bothered to understand. Sighing, she turned away the energy for even her passion deserting her. She walked to the large mahogany desk that had once been her father's and sat down, staring blankly at the polished wood grain. She felt a profound sense of hopelessness. Perhaps Tavian was right. Perhaps she was just a relic, ill-suited for the modern, high-stakes world he inhabited. Her eyes landed on her laptop. On a whim, she opened it, the screen casting a pale blue light on her face. Her inbox was mostly spam and newsletters she never read. But then she saw it. An email that had arrived 2 days ago buried beneath the digital junk mail. The subject line was simple: regarding your monograph on Venetian varnish techniques. Her brow furrowed. She had published that paper over 6 years ago in a small, obscure academic journal. It was a deeply technical piece, the culmination of her postgraduate research written before Tavian had convinced her to abandon her academic career. She had assumed it had vanished into the ether, read by no one. The sender was a name that made her breath catch in her throat. Desmond Pierce, chief curator of the Metropolitan Legacy Museum. He was a legend in the art world, a man whose opinion could make or break careers. With a trembling hand, she clicked open the email. Dear Ms. Mayo, please forgive the unsolicited correspondence. I recently had the pleasure of discovering your monograph, a chemical and historical analysis of Venetian varnish techniques, 1550 to 1650. To say I was impressed would be a gross understatement. Your insights are not merely academic. They are the work of a true practitioner with an intuitive understanding of the old masters. The Metropolitan Legacy Museum is about to embark on its most ambitious restoration project, to date the complete restoration of the Beaumont collection, recently bequeathed to us by the Beaumont Foundation. The centerpiece is a triptych that has baffled conservators for decades due to its unique and deteriorating finish, believed to be from the very period you specialize in. I know this is forward, but I would be honored if you would consider lending your expertise to this project. In fact, Mrs. Genevieve Beaumont, herself the patron of the collection, has expressed a keen interest in meeting the author of the monograph that has given us our first real hope for the collection. She is hosting the Starlight Charity Gala this evening. I realize this is incredibly short notice, but I am attending and would be delighted if you would join me as my personal guest. It would be the perfect, informal setting for you to meet Mrs. Beaumont and discuss the possibility of leading this historic undertaking. I sincerely hope you will consider it. Yours respectfully, Desmond Pierce, Chief Curator, Metropolitan Legacy Museum. Kendall read the email once then, twice then a third time. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, joyful rhythm she hadn't felt in years. It felt like a dream, a fantasy conjured from her own despair. Desmond Pierce, Genevieve Beaumont. The Starlight Gala. Her first thought was a surge of pure, unadulterated validation. Someone saw her. Someone of consequence had looked past the simple, quiet woman and seen the scholar, the expert, the artist. The very interest she'd mentioned to Tavian, the one he had scoffed at, was the exact reason she was being sought out by the most respected figures in the field. Her second thought was a wave of cold, crippling doubt. I can't. Tavian's voice was in her head again. You don't look the part. You're a distraction. You don't fit in. She pictured herself at the gala, in her simple dress, surrounded by women dripping in diamonds and couture. She imagined Tavian's face, his shock turning to fury. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach. She closed the laptop, her hand shaking. It was impossible. It was too late. She wasn't that person anymore. Tavian had made sure of it. But then her eyes drifted back to the darkened painting on the easel. It was waiting patiently, its hidden beauty still there, obscured but not extinguished. All it needed was a skilled and steady hand to peel back the layers of neglect and let its light shine through. A slow, defiant fire began to burn in her veins. For years, she had allowed Tavian to be the grime, the dust, the discolored varnish that obscured her own brilliance. He had told her what she was, and like a fool, she had believed him. She stood up, her posture straighter than it had been in years. Desmond Pierce's email wasn't just an invitation. It was a key. It was a chance not just to restore a painting, but to restore herself. "I am not a distraction," she said aloud, her voice ringing with newfound clarity in the silent room. "I am the main event." The clock in the foyer began to chime. She had less than 2 hours. Panic, sharp and electrifying, was the first emotion to hit Kendall quickly, followed by a wave of exhilarating determination. 2 hours. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Her mind, so often dulled by the monotony of her life, was now racing, firing with a speed and clarity she had forgotten she possessed. Her first move was to her closet, a vast walk-in space filled with racks of clothes Tavian's stylists had chosen for her. They were beautiful, expensive, and utterly soulless. Beige cashmere, sensible grey suits, pastel day dresses. They were the clothes of a woman designed to blend in, to be pleasant and unobtrusive. They were the uniform of the cage. She pushed past them dismissively, her hands flying over the hangers until they reached the very back behind a row of winter coats. There, shrouded in a heavy canvas garment bag, was the dress. She had bought it 5 years ago on a solo trip to Paris, one of her last acts of defiance before Tavian had curtailed her independent travel. It was a couturier piece from a small independent designer, purchased in a moment of reckless abandon. She had never worn it. Tavian had seen it once and declared it far too dramatic. With a deep breath, she unzipped the bag. The dress spilled out like liquid midnight. It was a deep, starless emerald green, fashioned from a heavy silk that shimmered with an inner light. It was not a dress that shouted. It whispered of power and mystery. The cut was masterful, a high, elegant neckline that descended into a daringly low back, long sleeves, and a column silhouette that skimmed the body before flaring ever so slightly at the floor. It was the dress of a woman who was utterly unapologetically herself. Holding it against her body, she looked in the mirror. For the first time, the reflection didn't look like a stranger. It looked like a promise. Next, her jewelry box. It was filled with ostentatious pieces, Frotavian heavy diamonds and garish gold, each one feeling like a beautifully crafted manacle. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a small, velvet-lined drawer at the bottom and pulled out the only pieces that truly belonged to her. A pair of antique earrings, delicate filigrees of silver set with small teardrop moonstones. They had been her grandmother's, a fellow academic who had always encouraged Kendall's passions. As she worked, a strange calm settled over her. This wasn't a panicked scramble. It was a meticulous, deliberate reclamation. She styled her own hair, sweeping it up into a chignon that was both classic and severe, leaving a few tendrils to frame her face. Her makeup was minimal but transformative, a bold, dark red lip that felt like a declaration of war. With 15 minutes to spare, she stood before the mirror once more. The woman looking back was someone she recognized from a long-forgotten dream. The emerald dress clung to her form, the moonstones gleamed against her skin, and her eyes, so often clouded with sadness, now shone with a brilliant, focused intensity. The simple navy dress of the forgotten wife lay discarded on a chair. This was Kendall Mayo unveiled. She slipped on a pair of simple black heels and grabbed a small velvet clutch. Her phone buzzed, a text from the concierge service Tavian used. "Your car is waiting downstairs, Mr. Grimsby." A wicked, delicious smile touched her lips. She typed a quick, polite reply to Desmond Pierce, accepting his invitation and letting him know she would meet him at the entrance. Then she called down to the doorman. "Robert, good evening," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "Mrs. Grimsby here. It seems my husband has taken his car. Could you please hail me a taxi? I'm running late for an engagement." There was a brief, surprised pause on the other end. "Of course, Mrs. Grimsby. Right away." Walking towards the elevator, she passed the portrait of her and Tavian that hung in the grand foyer, a soulless piece commissioned to celebrate their 5th anniversary. In it, she was smiling placidly, a pretty accessory to his powerful presence. She met the painted eyes of her husband and felt not a shred of fear or guilt, only a vast, liberating sense of distance. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a new world. As she stepped out into the crisp night air, the doorman, Robert, held the door of a yellow taxi for her, his eyes wide with an astonishment he was trying and failing to conceal. "The Vanguard Hall, please," she told the driver, settling back into the worn seat. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, she looked up at the penthouse, a glittering jewel box in the sky. It had been her prison, a place where she had been made to feel small and insignificant. But tonight its light seemed to be fading behind her as she moved towards a brighter, more brilliant future. She wasn't Tavian Grimsby's wife stepping out for the first time in months. She was Kendall Mayo, answering a call she should have never ignored. The Vanguard Hall was a cathedral of wealth and influence. A river of black town cars and limousines flowed towards its grand columned entrance, depositing figures adorned in shimmering gowns and sharp tuxedos onto a plush red carpet. The air crackled with the energy of the city's elite, a symphony of polite laughter, whispered gossip, and the percussive flash of paparazzi cameras. Kendall's humble yellow taxi was a canary in a flock of crows pulling up a respectful distance behind a sleek black Rolls-Royce. She paid the driver, her hand perfectly steady, and stepped out onto the pavement. For a moment she was invisible, just another face in the crowd of onlookers. The photographer's lenses were aimed at the latest starlet or a revered politician. This anonymity was a shield allowing her a moment to breathe, to center herself before stepping into the light. She saw him immediately. Desmond Pierce was waiting just past the main entrance, a figure of understated academic elegance. He was older, with a shock of silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He saw her before she reached him, and a warm, appreciative smile spread across his face. "Ms. Mayo," he said, his voice a rich baritone. He took her hand and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of old-world respect. "You are even more striking than your writing. I am so glad you could make it." "Mr. Pierce," Kendall replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that evening. "Thank you for the extraordinary invitation. The honor is all mine." "Nonsense." He waved a hand dismissively. "The honor will be ours if you agree to help us. But no shop talk for now. Let us get you a drink." As Desmond escorted her into the grand ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. The moment she was on his arm, the shield of anonymity vanished. Heads turned. The quiet hum of conversation faltered in their immediate vicinity as people took note. Desmond Pierce was not just a curator. He was a cultural kingmaker. The woman at his side was instantly a subject of intense speculation. Kendall could feel the weight of their gazes, but it was different from the crushing weight of Tavian's judgment. This was curiosity, not condemnation. She held her head high, her emerald dress catching the light of the crystal chandeliers, the moonstone earrings glowing softly. She didn't shrink or falter. She met the curious looks with a serene, confident gaze of her own. Across the vast, crowded room, Tavian Grimsby was holding court. He stood with a circle of powerful men, a glass of champagne in one hand, the other resting possessively on the small of Katrina Monroe's back. Katrina was his current project, a social media influencer with a manufactured pedigree and a dress that was more expensive than it was tasteful, a confection of red sequins that screamed for attention. She laughed too loudly at Tavian's remarks, her eyes constantly scanning the room, assessing her competition. Tavian was in his element, powerful and admired. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory anecdote when he felt the subtle shift in the room's energy. He followed the gaze of one of his companions, his eyes scanning the crowd for the source of the disturbance. And then he saw her. For a full second, his brain failed to process the image. He saw a breathtaking woman in an emerald green dress, standing beside the one and only Desmond Pierce, looking as if she belonged there more than anyone else in the room. Her poise, her confidence, the way she commanded attention without demanding it, it was all foreign. Then his mind caught up. The face. It was Kendall. The champagne glass in his hand tilted a few drops, spilling onto the polished floor. A muscle in his jaw clenched. It was impossible. This couldn't be his quiet, simple wife. This was a different creature entirely. A stranger wearing her face. "Tavian, darling, are you all right?" Katrina purred, noticing his sudden rigidity. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Kendall. He watched as Desmond Pierce leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and she laughed a low, musical sound that he hadn't heard in years. It was a laugh of genuine amusement, of effortless charm. It was not the stifled, polite chuckle she offered at his own dull dinner parties. Rage cold and pure surged through him. It was followed by a disorienting sense of confusion. How did she get here? Who was she with, and how in God's name did she know Desmond Pierce? But beneath the anger and confusion was a deeper, more unsettling emotion, a prickle of fear. The woman across the room was not the one he had left in the penthouse. The ornament had somehow gotten off its shelf, and it was shining with a brilliance he had never suspected it possessed. He had intended to keep her hidden to protect his image from her simplicity. But looking at her now, captivating the attention of the very people he sought to impress, he had a sinking feeling that he hadn't been protecting himself from her weakness, but from her strength. The ballroom was a galaxy of manufactured stars, each vying for the brightest glow. Tavian, recovering his composure, tried to dismiss the sight of Kendall. He turned back to his conversation, forcing a laugh and clapping a fellow developer on the back, but his performance was hollow. His gaze kept drifting back across the room to the vision in emerald green. He watched her move through the crowd with Desmond Pierce, not with the timid uncertainty he expected, but with a serene grace. She wasn't just being introduced. She was engaging, listening intently, her intelligent eyes alight with interest. He saw her speaking with a senator, then the CEO of a major tech firm. They weren't being polite. They were captivated. The simmering rage within him began to boil. She was making a fool of him. This was a calculated act of defiance, a public rebellion designed to humiliate him. "Who is that woman with Desmond Pierce?" Katrina asked a society columnist, standing nearby, her voice dripping with feigned nonchalance. The columnist squinted. "I have no idea. But if Desmond brought her, she must be somebody." The remark was a poisoned dart in Tavian's ego. Somebody. His wife, who he had deemed a nobody, was now being labeled a somebody, all without him. Kendall, for her part, was only vaguely aware of Tavian's presence. She was too absorbed, too alive. The conversations were stimulating, the art on the walls was magnificent, and for the first time in a decade, she felt like she was in her element. Desmond was a masterful guide, not just introducing her, but framing her. "This is Kendall Mayo," he would say, his voice filled with reverence. "Her work on Venetian preservation is about to change the game." Finally, the lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. The host of the evening, the elegant and formidable matriarch of New York society, Mrs. Genevieve Beaumont, was walking towards the stage. She was a woman in her 70s, with piercing blue eyes and an air of authority that no amount of money could buy. Tavian immediately straightened his tie and guided Katrina closer to the stage, positioning himself for maximum visibility. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, a chance to be seen by the woman who held the keys to his next big project. Mrs. Beaumont tapped the microphone, her warm, clear voice filling the hall. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight in support of the city's youth arts programs." She spoke for several minutes, thanking key donors and patrons. Tavian smiled expectantly, anticipating a mention of his own significant contribution. But tonight, Mrs. Beaumont continued, her expression shifting to one of profound excitement. "I have another very special announcement to make. As many of you know, my family's greatest passion has always been the preservation of art. It is with immense pride that I announce the official endowment of the Beaumont Collection to the Metropolitan Legacy Museum." A wave of appreciative applause swept through the room. Tavian clapped enthusiastically, his eyes fixed on Mrs. Beaumont. "This collection," she went on, her voice filled with emotion, "is the work of a lifetime, and its centerpiece, a triptych by an artist we've only recently identified, has long been considered unrestorable, its beauty lost to time. We feared it would remain that way forever." She paused, letting the drama build. "Until now." Her eyes scanned the crowd, sweeping past Tavian without a flicker of recognition. Her gaze landed on the spot where Kendall stood with Desmond Pierce. A brilliant smile illuminated her face. Through a stroke of incredible fortune, our esteemed curator, Mr. Desmond Pierce, discovered the work of a scholar whose quiet genius has provided the key we have been searching for. Her research is not just brilliant, it is revolutionary. She has given us hope not just for our collection, but for countless other works that were once thought to be lost. Tavian felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. He knew with sickening certainty what was coming next. Mrs. Beaumont raised her hand and gestured directly towards Kendall. "It is my profound honor to announce that this monumental restoration project will be led by this remarkable woman. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage the head of the Beaumont Collection Restoration Project, Miss Kendall Mayo." The spotlight swung away from the stage and cut through the dim ballroom landing directly on Kendall. For a heartbeat, the entire room was sought, every single guest turning to stare. In the brilliant white light, her emerald dress seemed to ignite the moonstones at her ears, glowing like captured stars. She looked ethereal, powerful, and utterly breathtaking. Then the room exploded into applause. Tavian Grimsby stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The blood drained from his head, and the polite applause around him sounded like a roaring in his ears. Katrina stared, her perfectly painted mouth agape. The woman Tavian had called a distraction, the wife he had deemed unsuitable, was now the guest of honor. He had come to the gala to be in the spotlight, to cement his place among the elite. But in one shocking moment, the spotlight had found his wife instead, and he was left standing in her shadow, exposed and utterly insignificant. The applause was a wave washing over Kendall. For a fleeting second, the old instincts kicked in, the urge to shrink, to deflect the attention, to look for a shadow to hide in. But then she met Desmond's proud, encouraging gaze, and she felt the steel settle in her spine. This was not a moment to fear. It was a moment to claim. With a poise she didn't know she possessed, she gave a graceful nod and began to move towards the stage. The crowd parted for her, as if by magic. She was aware of the whispers, the astonished looks, the frantic murmuring, as people tried to place her. Mayo? Is she one of the Boston Mayos? I've never seen her before. My God, that dress! Her path took her directly past Tavian. She didn't plan it, but she couldn't avoid it. As she drew level with him, her eyes met his. The shock on his face was visceral, his handsome features twisted into a mask of rage and utter bewilderment. He looked like a king whose crown had just been snatched from his head in front of his entire court. In that moment, he didn't see his wife. He saw a threat, a betrayal of the highest order. He reached out his hand, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Kendall! He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, meant for her ears alone. What is the meaning of this? What game are you playing? His touch was like a spark on dry tinder. All the years of silent resentment, of swallowed words and stifled ambitions, coalesced into a single point of cold, clear fury. She stopped. She didn't flinch or pull away. She simply turned her head slowly to look down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the soft, hesitant murmur he was used to. It was low, steady, and cut through the air like chilled steel. "Let go of me, Tavian," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The sheer, unexpected force of her tone made him recoil as if he'd been burned. His hand dropped from her arm. People nearby, sensing the sudden tension, fell silent, their eyes wide. Katrina, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to assert her position. She stepped forward, linking her arm through Tavian's. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine condescension as she addressed Kendall. "You must be so confused. This is a private event. Perhaps your invitation had a misprint." Kendall didn't even grant Katrina a full glance. Her focus was entirely on Tavian. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting him see the stranger she had become, or rather the woman she had been all along. The woman he had tried and failed to erase. With a final dismissive look, she turned her back on him and continued her walk to the stage, leaving him standing there speechless and exposed, with his mistress clinging to his arm like a gaudy accessory. The public rejection was absolute, a silent, devastating blow, delivered with more power than any shout could have achieved. On stage, Mrs. Beaumont greeted her with a warm embrace. "My dear," the older woman murmured, "I am so thrilled. You are a lifesaver." Mrs. Beaumont handed her the microphone. Kendall stepped up to the podium, her heart hammering, but her mind clear. She looked out over the sea of faces, powerful, influential, and all staring at her. She saw Desmond smiling from the front row, and in the middle of the crowd, she saw Tavian, his face ashen, his empire of ego crumbling around him. "Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont." Kendall began, her voice ringing out clear and confident through the ballroom's excellent sound system. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I am overwhelmed by your faith in me. For a long time, I have been a quiet student of the past, finding solace in bringing beauty back to things that were forgotten or overlooked. She paused, letting her eyes sweep the room, letting the subtle double meaning of her words settle. The Beaumont collection is not just a collection of paintings. It is a collection of stories, of histories, of passions. Like anything of true value, it requires patience, respect, and a delicate touch to reveal its true brilliance. Sometimes the most beautiful things are hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to see their worth. The speech was short, elegant, and powerful. It was a mission statement, not just for the art, but for herself. When she finished, the applause was even louder, more genuine this time. It was a validation not of her name or her husband's wealth, but of her talent and her spirit. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately enveloped by a crowd of admirers. A museum board member wanted to discuss her techniques. A wealthy collector wanted to know her opinion on a piece he owned. The senator from earlier was congratulating her warmly. She was no longer an appendage of Tavian Grimsby. She was Kendall Mayo, a force in her own right. From across the room, Tavian watched the scene, a storm of impotent fury raging within him. He had orchestrated the entire evening to be his coronation, but he had become a footnote in his own wife's ascension. Every handshake she received, every impressed smile sent her way, was another nail in the coffin of his pride. He had refused to take his wife out because he was ashamed of her. Now, standing in a room full of the world's most powerful people, he had never felt so ashamed of himself. The rest of the evening unfolded for Kendall, not as a dream, but as a homecoming to a life she had been forced to abandon. The initial shock of the announcement gave way to a steady, invigorating hum of purpose. She was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of Tavian's world. She was the gravitational center of a new one, and she found its pull exhilarating. She was swept from one fascinating conversation to another, each one a thread weaving her back into the vibrant tapestry of the intellectual and cultural world she so dearly missed. The director of a prestigious Parisian museum, a formidable man she had only ever read about in art journals, engaged her in a spirited debate about the merits of a new pigment analysis technique. A renowned art collector, known for his reclusive nature, sought her out to ask her opinion on a disputed Titian he had recently acquired. He listened to her thoughtful, nuanced response with an expression of rapt attention. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't just offering a polite, pre-approved opinion. She was sharing her expertise, her passion, and it was being met not with condescension, but with genuine respect and admiration. It was as if a part of her soul, long locked away and gathering dust, had been thrown open to the light and air, and was breathing deeply once more. Across the ballroom, Tavian watched this metamorphosis with a curdling mixture of fury and dread. He was marooned on a small island of his own making, while the tide of social relevance washed away from him, all flowing towards Kendall. His attempts to re-engage with his circle were met with polite but distinctly cool responses. Their eyes would dart over his shoulder towards the growing crowd around his wife, their attention clearly elsewhere. He had become yesterday's news in the space of a single speech. Even Katrina, his glittering prize, had begun to tarnish. She was a creature of social momentum, and she could sense his was rapidly decelerating. Her hand, which had been so possessively on his arm, now rested on her own hip. Her laughter, once a loud declaration of her place by his side, was now a nervous titter directed at a more promising hedge fund manager nearby. "Quite a surprise your wife sprung on you," a business rival commented, with a smirk, passing by with a fresh glass of champagne. "You kept her talents well hidden." The jab was casual, but expertly placed, and it struck Tavian like a physical blow. He saw Katrina's eyes narrow, her mind performing a swift and ruthless calculation. She looked from Tavian's thunderous, powerless face to Kendall's serene, radiant one. Without another word, she detached herself from his side, murmuring a flimsy excuse about needing to find the powder room. She then made a direct course for the circle surrounding Kendall, a predatory smile fixed on her face, ready to attach herself to the new source of power. It was a betrayal so swift and transparent that it left Tavian breathless with rage. The final crushing blow came from the architect of the evening's triumph herself. Tavian saw Mrs. Genevieve Beaumont moving through the crowd with the unhurried grace of a battleship, her course set directly for him. A pathetic, desperate flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps this was a formality, a discussion about his donation, a chance to salvage something from the wreckage. But her expression as she came to a stop before him was not one of negotiation. It was a look of profound, clinical disappointment, the kind a judge gives before passing a sentence that has long been decided. "Mr. Grimsby," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier warmth. It was formal, clipped, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "I believe we had a preliminary discussion regarding my foundation's potential investment in your waterfront development." "Yes, Mrs. Beaumont. I was so hoping we could finalize the details." Tavian began, his voice straining for a normalcy he did not feel. "I'm certain you'll find the projections." She silenced him with a subtle, almost imperceptible raise of her hand. "My foundation and I personally make it a point to partner with individuals who demonstrate integrity, vision, and a deep abiding respect for true value. Not just in business dealings, Mr. Grimsby, but in all aspects of their lives." Her gaze shifted for a mere second, a pointed, meaningful flicker towards Kendall, who was now laughing at something the Parisian museum director had said. The message was unmistakable. "It has become abundantly clear to me this evening," Mrs. Beaumont continued, her eyes returning to him cold as chips of ice, "that our core values are not aligned. Your judgment in more ways than one has proven to be profoundly flawed. We will be withdrawing our interest in your project, effective immediately. A formal notice will be sent to your office in the morning." She did not wait for a response. He was not worthy of one. She gave him a curt, dismissive nod and turned away, leaving Tavian standing alone in the center of a suddenly very empty space. The Beaumont investment was more than just capital. It was the seal of legitimacy, the keystone in the arch of his most ambitious project. Without it, the entire structure would collapse into a mountain of debt and ruin. His reputation would be shattered. He had walked into the gala a king and would leave as a pariah, dethroned by the very woman he had sought to imprison. Kendall departed shortly after a quiet, graceful exit. Desmond Pierce, a true gentleman, escorted her through the thinning crowd to a private car he had summoned. "You were magnificent tonight, Kendall," he said, his eyes filled with a warm, paternal pride. "You reminded everyone what true substance looks like. The art world found its new star." "Thank you, Desmond," she said, her voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond gratitude. "For everything. You have no idea what you've done for me." "I think I do," he replied gently, holding the car door for her. He smiled. "Welcome back." The words echoed in her heart all the way back to the penthouse. Welcome back. She hadn't realized just how far away she'd been. When she stepped out of the elevator, the oppressive silence of the apartment was broken by the clink of glass on marble. All the lights were blazing. Tavian was in the center of the vast living room, his impeccably tailored suit, now rumpled his tie, ripped loose from his collar. A half-empty bottle of expensive scotch sat on the table beside him, a testament to his lonely, bitter vigil. The mask of invincible confidence was not just gone. It had been shattered, revealing the raw, ugly desperation beneath. "So," he began, his voice a low, venomous slur as he staggered to his feet. "That was quite the performance. Meticulously planned, I assume, all this time playing the part of the dutiful, simple little wife. Were you laughing at me? Was this your grand plan all along? To humiliate me?" Kendall paused, placing her velvet clutch on the console table with a soft, deliberate click. She looked at him, at this broken, raging man, and felt not a flicker of the fear that had once defined her existence. The power dynamic between them had not just been altered, it had been incinerated and remade from the ashes. "There was no plan, Tavian," she said, her voice unnaturally calm and clear. "There was only an invitation, an opportunity, one that I decided to accept. You told me I wasn't suitable, that I didn't belong in your world." She took a slow step into the room, her presence commanding the space in a way it never had before. "It turns out you were wrong. Or perhaps," she added, her voice dropping to a cool, cutting whisper, "it was never your world to begin with. It was just a stage, and you were always a lesser actor than you believed." "A lesser actor?" he roared, his voice cracking. "My world is falling apart because of you. The Beaumont deal is dead. The waterfront project is dead. My reputation is ruined. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Yes, I do," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "It means that you built your world on a foundation of arrogance, deceit, and cruelty. You treated people as objects, as pawns in your game, myself included. Foundations like that are not meant to last, Tavian. They are destined to crumble under their own weight. You are the architect of your own ruin. I was just the part of the design you foolishly overlooked." He stared at her, his drunken mind flailing, unable to comprehend the transformation. This was not his Kendall. This was a stranger, a queen who had calmly walked into his castle and declared it her own. The woman he thought he knew, the one he had so carefully molded and controlled, was gone forever, if she had ever truly existed at all. "I'm leaving Tavian," she said, the words spoken with a simple, devastating finality. "My lawyer will be in contact with yours in the morning regarding the terms of our separation. I will arrange to have my personal things, the few things that are actually mine, moved out by the end of the week." She turned her back straight, her steps unhurried, and walked towards the guest wing of the apartment, to a room she had not slept in for years. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to see but the wreckage. The gilded cage was finally open, and she was flying free into a sky of her own making. Behind her, Tavian Grimsby finally collapsed into his chair, the sound of his own ragged breath filling the vast empty room. He was surrounded by priceless art, stunning views, and every conceivable luxury, a king in a kingdom of ashes. The silence that descended was absolute, a profound emptiness that echoed the one now hollowed out inside of him. It was the sound of his entire world crashing down around him. Kendall's story is a powerful reminder that true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. For years, she allowed her brilliance to be hidden, convinced by the man who should have been her biggest champion that she was not enough. But a person's worth is not a currency to be spent or devalued by another. It is an intrinsic quality waiting for the right moment to shine. Her triumph wasn't just about walking into a gala. It was about walking back into her own life, reclaiming her identity, and proving that the quietest voices often have the most profound things to say. She didn't need to tear her husband down. His own arrogance and cruelty did that for him. She simply had to rise, and in doing so she let him fall. If her journey from the shadows into the spotlight inspired you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with anyone who has ever felt overlooked or underestimated. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice and empowerment. What did you think of Kendall's transformation? Let us know in the comments below.